My name is Imogen Strickland, and I'm 30 years old. Last Saturday night, in front of 140 people at the Grandover Resort Ballroom in Greensboro, North Carolina, my father handed me a microphone and told me to apologize publicly for being a bad daughter. He had hired a notary to make the apology official. He had no idea that same notary had already notarized a 4-page affidavit I filed 2 months earlier, documenting every 2 in the morning voicemail he ever left me asking for money. I'm Imogen Strickland. I'm 30 years old. I work as a commercial real estate paralegal at a firm on West Market Street. And what happened at my father's retirement party last weekend wasn't something I planned. It was something my mother planned 11 years ago, before the cancer took her in the spring of my sophomore year of college. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to say this. If stories like this find you at the right moment, subscribe. I share a new one every night, quietly, for people who already know what it's like. And drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to the summer I was 12, when my mother said something to me at the kitchen sink that I didn't understand until I was 28, sitting in a notary's office in Greensboro, with my hands shaking so hard I couldn't sign my own name on the first try. We lived in a small ranch house off Friendly Avenue, the kind with a carport instead of a garage and a magnolia tree in the front yard that dropped those waxy white flowers all over the walk in June. My mother's name was Della. She was a high school guidance counselor at Page High for 19 years, and she had a way of looking at people like she could already see the part they were trying to hide. Her hands always smelled like the lemon dish soap she bought at Harris Teeter. She kept a row of African violets on the windowsill above the sink, and she talked to them quietly, like they were old friends. The biggest one, in a chipped pink pot, she called Eleanor. The smallest one, in a yellow pot from a yard sale, she called Pete. That summer, my dad was on the road 4 days a week selling drywall and lumber to contractors all up and down I-85. He drove a maroon Buick Park Avenue with a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror that he had won at a charity auction and didn't know how to pray. When he came home on Thursday nights, he came home loud. He'd walk in the front door already in the middle of a story, already laughing at his own punchline, and the air in the house would shift. My mother would smile. She would set the table with the good plates from her own grandmother's cabinet, the ones with the tiny blue cornflower pattern around the edge. She would ask the right questions in the right places. And then, after he went to bed, she would stand at the kitchen sink washing the same plate 3 times. I was at the table doing a word search the night I asked her, "Mama, why are you washing that plate again?" She didn't look at me. She just said, very quietly, "Royce loves an audience more than he loves any one person in it." I was 12. I didn't know what that meant. I went back to my word search and circled the word harvest and forgot about it. But there are other things I remember from that summer. I remember the night my dad came home with a brand new pickup he hadn't told my mother he was buying. I remember her sitting at the kitchen table with the household account ledger open, a yellow number 2 pencil in her hand, and her face going very still. She didn't say anything. She closed the ledger. She made meatloaf. She washed the dishes 3 times each. I remember the Sunday at First Presbyterian when my dad stood up during testimony time and told the whole congregation a story about how he had given a stranded family the money for a hotel room on his way to a sales meeting in Charlotte. He told it well. People wiped their eyes. Pastor Whitlock thanked him from the pulpit. And on the way home in the Buick, I remember asking my mother if it was true. She said, "Imogen, there may have been a family. There may have been a hotel. There was certainly a story." I remember the year I was 14 and the school nurse called my mother because I had been throwing up in the girls' bathroom 3 days in a row from anxiety about a math test. My mother left work, drove to Page High in 8 minutes, sat in the nurse's office with me and said, "Imogen, listen to me. Some people in this world will love you for what you give them. Some people will love you for who you are. You spend your life learning the difference. The first kind will eat you alive if you let them." I didn't know who she was talking about. I do now. There were small things that built up over those years. The way my mother kept her own savings account at a credit union my father didn't bank with, and how she always paid the house water bill from that account specifically, even though she never explained why. The way she taught me to write a check at age 15 by sitting me down at the kitchen table with a stack of her old check registers and walking me through every line item, every entry, every dollar accounted for, and how she said when we were finished, "Imogen, a woman who knows where her money is a woman nobody can move." The way she signed me up for a savings account of my own at the credit union when I turned 16 and put me on a lease of nothing ever that she did not also have a copy of. The way she made me memorize Walter Kettle's office address before I could drive a car. I thought she was being thrifty. I thought she was being old-fashioned. I thought she was teaching me what her own mother had taught her. I did not understand until I was almost 30 that she was teaching me how to survive being her daughter. 11 years after that summer at the kitchen sink, in a hospice room at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, my mother held my hand and said, "Imogen, there's an attorney downtown. His name is Walter Kettle. When the time comes, he has a letter from me. Don't open it unless you need to. You'll know." She died on a Tuesday morning in April. The dogwoods were blooming on the lawn outside her hospice window, and the nurse who was with us at the end was a woman named Patrice, who had also been one of my mother's students at Page High in 1994. Patrice cried more than I did that morning. She said, "Della saved my life when I was 16, baby. I just want you to know that." My father wore his good gray suit to the funeral. He stood at the lectern at First Presbyterian, and he gave a eulogy that made everyone in the pews cry, including the pastor. He talked about how he had loved her at first sight in the lunch line at Western Carolina University in 1979. He talked about her African violets. He talked about her chicken and dumplings. He was magnificent. He was the saddest widower in Greensboro for almost 6 months. Then he was the most eligible bachelor in Greensboro. And 9 months after that, he married Bethany. Bethany was 41 when she married my dad. She had 2 grown sons from her first marriage and a yappy little Shih Tzu named Mr. Bingley and a Pinterest board for the wedding that she had been quietly building for, I am told by my cousin Renee, almost 2 years before my mother died. I do not have proof of that timeline. But Bethany has the kind of face that tells you exactly what it knows, and her face told me everything at the rehearsal dinner. The rehearsal dinner was at a steakhouse on Battleground Avenue. I was 21. I was a junior at UNC Greensboro. I came home for the wedding because that is what daughters do. I wore a sage green dress that my mother would have liked. I held my smile through the toasts. And when my new stepmother leaned over at the reception the next afternoon and squeezed my arm and said, "Sweetie, your mama would want your daddy to be happy," I understood for the first time what my mother had meant about an audience. Bethany had a particular gift. She could say something cruel using only words a Sunday school teacher might use. At Thanksgiving the next year, she told me, in front of my Aunt Lorraine and 2 cousins, that I was looking healthy, in a tone that made it clear I was looking heavy. At Christmas, she said it was sweet, that I still kept my mother's African violets, even though they were really past their prime, weren't they? On my 23rd birthday, she gave me a card with 20 in it and a note that said, "For whatever skincare situation you're working on." She smiled the whole time. I finished college. I went to paralegal school at Guilford Tech. I got a job at a commercial real estate firm downtown, the kind of firm where you wear pencil skirts and learn the difference between a quitclaim deed and a warranty deed in your first 6 weeks. My senior partner, a woman named Geraldine, took me under her wing. She had the same Pyrex casserole dish in her office break room that my grandmother had owned. She taught me how to read a title commitment. She taught me how to spot a forged signature from across a conference room. She taught me, without ever using the word, how to be patient. I rented a little apartment off Battleground Avenue with a kitchen window that faced east. I drove a 2014 Honda CR-V that I bought used with my mother's life insurance because she had told me, very specifically, in that hospice room, that the first thing I should do with the money was buy a car I could trust. I keep her African violets on my own windowsill now, all 5 of them, including Eleanor and Pete. They have outlived her by 11 years. And every few months, my father would call me. And every call had the same shape. It would start with my name, drawn out long, the way he used to say it when I was little. "Imogen, how's my best girl?" Then a story. always a story first. About someone at church, or someone he ran into at the Lowe's parking lot, or about Bethany's boys, who he liked to call the men, even though they were 26 and 28 and lived in their mother's basement until well after she remarried. Then a pivot. Always the same pivot. Listen, sweetheart, I gotta ask you something. And then the number. Just $4,500 to bridge me until Friday. Just $12,000 for the down payment on Bethany's car. We'll pay you back from the tax refund. Just $26,000 to clean up that mess with the IRS. You know how those people are. Just $80,000 to get into something with Carl Pemberton. You remember Carl, he's good as gold. The first 3 times when the numbers were small, I said yes. I did the wire transfer from my checking account on a Tuesday afternoon, and I told myself it was what my mother would have wanted. I was 22. I had just buried her. I was working at a sandwich shop on Spring Garden Street while I was finishing my paralegal certificate, making $9 an hour plus tips. The first 3 times, I never saw a dollar back. Not one. The 4th time, when he asked for the $26,000 for the IRS, I went to see Walter Kettle. Walter Kettle's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Elm Street, above a bridal shop called Eleanor's. The shop was closed on Mondays, and the smell of the dry cleaner 2 doors down floated up the stairwell. Walter was 74 years old. He wore brown loafers that he had been resoling since 1987, and he typed his correspondence on an IBM Selectric that sat on a side table because he did not trust computers. There was a glass bowl of butterscotch candies on his desk, the wrappers crinkling when you took one. There was a framed Tar Heels football schedule from 1981 on the wall, signed by a player whose name I didn't recognize. He stood up when I walked in. He said, "Imogen, you look so much like your mother, I had to sit down for a second when I saw you in the hallway." He went to a small green safe in the corner. He turned the dial. He took out a manila envelope with my name on the front in my mother's handwriting, and he handed it to me. He said, "Your mother gave me this 13 days before she died. She told me you would come when you needed it. I wasn't sure when, but I had a feeling it would be in the next year or 2. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, and I read my mother's letter. It was 3 pages, single-spaced, written in her careful guidance counselor handwriting. The kind of handwriting that puts a small loop on every lowercase d. She told me, in those 3 pages, that she had inherited a sum of money from her own father in 1998, before I was born, and that she had quietly placed it in an irrevocable trust in my name in the spring of 2008, 3 months after her diagnosis. She had named Walter Kettle as trustee. She had instructed Walter to release the principal to me on my 25th birthday and not before. She had also instructed him, in writing, that if my father ever asked for access to the trust, in any form, for any reason, the answer was no, and the request was to be documented and dated and placed in a separate file. She wrote near the end of the letter, "Imogen, your father is not a bad man. He is a hungry man. He is hungry for an audience that loves him as much as he loves himself, and he will spend whatever is in front of him to keep that audience clapping. I loved him for 24 years, and I am tired. The money is for you. The trust is for you. Walter is for you. Use them." I read the letter twice. Then I read it a 3rd time. Walter pushed the bowl of butterscotch toward me without saying anything, and I took one and held it in my hand without unwrapping it for a long time. I asked Walter about the file he had been keeping. He pulled out a slim folder. There were already 4 entries in it. My father had asked Walter 3 separate times after my mother's death whether there was anything in Della's name that needed handling. Each time, Walter had told him there was nothing he was at liberty to discuss. Each time, Walter had written down the date, the time, the question, and his answer, and signed it. The 4th entry was from a phone call my father had made in November of 2017, in which he had said, and I am quoting from Walter's notes, "Look here, Walter. I know my wife had something put away. I'm not the kind of man who likes to be told what's none of my business in his own marriage," Walter said. I told him your mother's affairs were her own. He hung up on me. I wrote it down. I dated it. I signed it. I put it in the file. I sat in that chair with the butterscotch wrapper crinkling in my hand, and I understood, finally, what my mother had meant at the kitchen sink when I was 12. I told Walter about the $26,000 my father had asked for the week before. Walter took out a yellow legal pad and he wrote it down. He dated it. He signed it. He added it to the file. Then he looked at me and he said, "Imogen, from this day forward, I want you to keep your own file. Not for court, not for revenge, for you. Because the day will come when you will need to remember exactly what was true." I bought a small spiral notebook at the Walgreens on West Friendly that night. Black cover. Nothing special. The clerk was a kid who couldn't have been older than 17, and he gave me a free pack of gum because I looked, in his words, like "you've had a day, ma'am." For the next 6 years, I kept my own version of Walter's file. Every time my father called and asked for money, I wrote down the date, the time, the amount, and the exact words he used. Every time he left me a voicemail, I saved it. North Carolina is a one-party consent state for recordings, which means that as long as one person on a call knows it is being recorded, the recording is legal. I never recorded a live call, but I saved every voicemail. By the spring of last year, I had 41 voicemails. I had 3 pages of notes in the spiral notebook. I had a folder on my work computer, password protected, with screenshots of every text message. I had bank records of the 3 transfers I had made when I was 22 and still believed him. I had never once told my father no to his face. I had said, "I'll think about it." I had said, "Let me check my account." I had said, "Daddy, I just don't have it right now." I had never said no until last March. Last March, he called me on a Sunday afternoon. He was at home. I could hear Bethany's Shih Tzu in the background and the sound of a college basketball game on the television. He went through the whole rhythm. Imogen. Story about Carl Pemberton, who apparently now had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in a strip mall down in Eden, just over the Virginia line. Pivot. "Listen, sweetheart, I gotta ask you something." And then the number. $80,000. He said, "Imogen, you've got that money your grandfather left your mother. I know you do. Walter Kettle thinks I don't know about it, but I'm not stupid, sweetheart. That money was supposed to be for the family. It was always supposed to come back to the family." I held the phone very still. I was standing at my kitchen counter. The afternoon sun was coming in through the window over my sink. I could see the row of African violets I had inherited from my mother lined up on the sill. They were blooming. Eleanor had 3 new flowers. Pete had 2. I said, "No, Daddy." He said, "What did you say to me?" I said, "No, Daddy. The money is mine." Mama left it to me. "I'm not lending you $80,000 for Carl Pemberton or for anything else." There was a silence on the other end of the phone that lasted long enough for me to count the African violets. There were 5 of them. Then he said, very quietly, "Imogen, you are going to regret talking to me like that. You wait. You wait and see." He hung up. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I cried for about 20 minutes, the kind of crying that comes from a place older than the moment causing it. Then I got up, washed my face with cold water, and called Walter Kettle. Walter said, "Imogen, come in tomorrow morning at 9. Bring the notebook." I went the next morning. I sat in his leather chair. He read every entry in the notebook. He went back to his green safe and pulled out his own file, which by then had 11 years of entries in it. He took out a fresh yellow legal pad and started drafting. It took him 6 weeks. 2 months after that Sunday phone call, my dad announced his retirement party. Bethany sent the invitation in the mail. It was on heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering. Saturday, October 12th. Grandover Resort. 6 in the evening for cocktails, 7 for dinner, a special tribute at 8:30. Black tie optional. RSVP to Bethany. I read the words, "special tribute," 3 times. I called Walter that morning. I said, "Walter, he's planning something. I don't know what, but he's planning something." Walter said, "Imogen, come to the office on Tuesday. I think it's time." On Tuesday morning, I went to Walter's office. The smell of dry cleaning floated up the stairwell the way it always did. He had already drafted a 4-page affidavit. It documented 12 specific instances of financial coercion attempts by my father between 2018 and 2024. It included transcripts of 7 of the worst voicemails. It included the dates and amounts of the 3 transfers I had made when I was 22. It referenced the file Walter himself had been keeping for 11 years. It was sealed at the back with the original letter my mother had written him in 2008. Walter said, "We need a notary. I want one outside this office. I want this notarized by someone who has no relationship to me, no relationship to your father, no relationship to your firm. I want it clean." He gave me a name, Marguerite Boudreau. Mobile notary. Office in a small commercial strip on Wendover Avenue, between a State Farm agency and a place that did tax returns in February and turned into a Halloween costume rental in October. Walter said, "I have never met her. I asked another attorney across town for a name. He gave me hers. He said she is the most careful notary he has ever worked with." I went the next morning. Margie Boudreau was 58 years old. She had silver blonde hair pulled back in a low bun, and she wore a navy cardigan with mother-of-pearl buttons. There was a coffee mug on her desk that said, "World's Okayest Notary." She had a small framed photograph next to her computer of a man in a custodial uniform standing in front of a brick high school building, smiling at the camera with a cleaning cart behind him. The walls of her office were painted a soft yellow. There was a vase of silk daisies on the filing cabinet and a candle that smelled like fresh laundry burning on the windowsill. I sat down across from her. I had the affidavit in a manila folder. My hands were shaking so hard I had to put them in my lap to hide it. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. She said, "What's your name, sweetheart?" I said, "Imogen Strickland." She put her coffee down very slowly. She said, "Strickland, are you Della's girl?" I started to cry. "I didn't mean to, I just did." She came around the desk. She didn't hug me. She just put her hand on my shoulder the way my mother used to do, and she said, "Sit down, sweetheart. Tell me what your daddy did." It turned out that Margie's late husband, Maurice, had been the head custodian at Page High School for 22 years. He had worked under my mother during all of those years. He had been a type 1 diabetic, and during the worst stretches of his sugar crashes, my mother had brought him chicken and dumplings in the same Pyrex dish I now keep on the second shelf of my own kitchen cabinet. Margie said, "Della Strickland is the reason my Maurice kept his job through 3 principal changes. She is the reason he had insurance the year he had his first amputation. She brought a casserole to my house the week he died, and she sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, and she didn't try to fix anything. She just sat with me. I have never forgotten her. I will never forget her." Margie read the affidavit. She read it slowly. She read every voicemail transcript. She got to the one from the 3rd of August, 2022, in which my father had called me at 2:47 in the morning and left a 90-second message in which he told me that I was a selfish girl, that I had always been my mother's favorite, that my mother had ruined me, and that if I did not transfer $14,000 to him by Friday, he would tell my Aunt Lorraine what really happened with my mother's life insurance, which was a lie because nothing had happened with my mother's life insurance except that I had bought a Honda CR-V with it like she told me to. Margie read that one twice. Then she put down the page. She said, "Sweetheart, I am so sorry." She put her glasses back on. She read the rest of the affidavit straight through. She did not stop. She did not ask questions. When she got to the last page and the signature block, she looked up at me and she said, "Imogen, I want to tell you something before I notarize this. I have been a notary for 31 years. I started doing it part-time when Maurice was still working, mostly for real estate closings on Saturday mornings. After he passed, I did it full-time. In all 31 years, I have never refused a client. I have notarized for people I did not like. I have notarized for people I suspected were not telling the whole truth. I have notarized for 2 of the meanest men in Guilford County, both of whom are dead now. May God have mercy on them. I have notarized for a woman who was signing her grandmother's life away in a nursing home contract, and I cried in my car for an hour afterward." She stopped. She took a sip of her coffee. The mug was warm in her hands. She held it the way my mother used to hold a teacup in winter, with both hands wrapped around the cup like she was holding something alive. She said, "I have never in my career notarized something I felt this proud to put my stamp on. Your mother saved my Maurice's job. She saved my Maurice's life more than once. She was the only administrator in that whole high school who looked Maurice in the eye when she spoke to him for 22 years. I am about to put my official seal on a document that protects her daughter from the kind of man Della tried for 24 years to protect you from herself. So before I sign this, I just want you to know, from me, from Maurice, if he were here, Della Strickland is still working, right now, in this room, through this paper, and through me. Then she notarized the affidavit. She used a blue ink stamp. She signed her name in cursive with a careful hand that put a little curl on the capital M and a long sweep on the final X. She made me a copy on her own dime and put it in a fresh manila envelope. She wrote my name on the front in green marker. She walked me to my car. She stood in the parking lot in her navy cardigan with the October sun catching the silver in her hair, and she said, "Honey, whatever it is your daddy is planning, you let it come." Had you ever had to stay silent for years while someone you loved kept asking you for things you couldn't give? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. The retirement party was the second Saturday of October. I drove to the Grandover in my Honda CR-V. I wore a deep navy dress and the small gold chain my mother had given me on my 16th birthday. I had the affidavit in my purse. I did not know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed it close to me. I had also done something I had not told Walter about. I had texted my Aunt Lorraine, my dad's older sister, the day before. I had told her she might want to come to the party. She had not spoken to me in 9 years because of something I supposedly said at Christmas in 2015 that I do not remember saying. She had texted back, "I'll be there. I have wanted to talk to you for a long time. Don't say anything to your father." The Grandover Resort sits on the south side of Greensboro, all gold-framed mirrors and chandeliers the size of small cars. The ballroom held 140 people. The tables were round, 10 to a table, white linens, low arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus. There was a string quartet doing soft jazz standards during cocktails. There was a slideshow on a screen at the front of the room playing photos of my dad's career, set to "What a Wonderful World" by Louis Armstrong. There was a podium with a microphone next to a small table draped in white cloth. On the small table was a leather portfolio. Next to the portfolio was a fountain pen. Next to the pen was a notary stamp. And standing quietly off to one side of the table, in a navy cardigan with mother-of-pearl buttons and a small notary commission pinned to her lapel, was Margie Boudreau. She did not look at me when I walked in. She just kept her hands folded in front of her like she was waiting for a bus. My father saw me come in and he made his way across the room with his arms wide. He hugged me. He smelled like Old Spice and bourbon and the leather of his good belt. He said in a voice loud enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, "There she is. There's my girl. We're going to have a real special moment tonight, sweetheart, you and me." Bethany kissed the air next to my cheek. Her perfume was Estée Lauder, beautiful. The same scent my mother had worn for the first 6 years of her marriage before she switched to Jean Naté in 1997. I noticed this. I noticed everything. I sat at table 4. My cousins Renee and Lila sat with me. Aunt Lorraine sat across from me. She wore a maroon blazer and pearls, and she looked at me across the centerpiece with the look of a woman who has been holding her breath for a decade. Renee squeezed my hand under the table during the soup course and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded. I was not okay. I was something I did not yet have a word for. Dinner was chicken and a small portion of beef tenderloin and a piece of carrot cake with a fondant rose on top. The toast started at 8:30. Bethany went first. She talked about how my dad had rescued her after her first marriage. She used the word rescued 3 times. She thanked the regional sales team for being like family, but better. Some people laughed. I did not. Aunt Lorraine did not. I watched my aunt's hand close very slowly around her dinner roll until it was a tight white fist. Then Carl Pemberton stood up. The same Carl Pemberton who had the strip mall in Eden. He was 67 years old, wore a sport coat the color of margarine, and had the kind of grin that always looks like it's selling something even when it's not. He told a story about my dad selling him his first load of drywall in 1987, and he raised his glass and said, "To Royce, the man who never says no to a friend in need." There was a polite round of applause. Carl looked over at me and winked. I held my fork very still. Then a regional sales rep named Doug stood up. He was nervous. He read from a piece of paper. He said 3 things about my dad that may or may not have been true and then sat down very quickly. Then my dad stood up. He thanked the room. He told 3 stories that had punchlines. He worked the audience the way a preacher works, a tent revival. The slideshow behind him kept cycling. There was a photo of him with my mother, taken at my high school graduation. She was smiling. She had already been diagnosed by then. I was the only person in that room who knew it. Then he said, "Before we wrap up tonight, I want to do something special. Something my late wife Della would have wanted me to do. I want to bring up my daughter Imogen." The room turned to look at me. He said, "Sweetheart, come up here." I stood up. I picked up my purse. I walked to the front of the room. The carpet under the heels of my navy shoes was a pattern of small gold medallions on a deep red ground. I remember looking down at it as I walked and counting medallions until I got to the podium. He put his arm around my shoulders. He said into the microphone, "Folks, you all know I'm a sentimental man, and I want to say something my Imogen and I have been needing to say to each other for a long time now. We've had a hard year. We've said some hard things to each other, and I want her to have the chance, in front of everyone here who loves us, to make things right. Sweetheart, take the microphone." He pressed the microphone into my hand. He said into a second handheld microphone he had been keeping in his jacket pocket, "Now, because I know how much my Imogen values the law and how much she values doing things proper, I've asked our family notary to come up here and notarize her statement tonight, so we can put this little chapter behind us, official and binding." He gestured at Margie. Margie did not move from her spot by the small table. She looked at him. She tilted her head very slightly to the side, the way a teacher looks at a student who has just made a math error she is going to enjoy correcting. She said in a clear, calm voice that carried across the ballroom, "Mr. Strickland, I have to clarify something for the record." The string quartet, which had been doing soft underscore behind the speeches, stopped playing. Margie said, "I don't believe I am your family notary, sir. I have never met you before this evening. I was hired through your assistant by phone on Tuesday morning. And I have to say, before this goes any further, that I have a prior professional relationship with your daughter that I should disclose." A man at table 7, a regional sales rep named Doug, the same Doug who had read his toast off a piece of paper, turned around in his seat. He said, loud enough for me to hear, "Wait." "What?" My father's smile froze. He said, "What are you talking about?" Margie said, "Mr. Strickland, I notarized a sworn affidavit for your daughter 2 months ago, on August 14th, in my office on Wendover Avenue. I cannot in good conscience notarize a second document from her this evening without disclosing that prior engagement. It would be a conflict of professional ethics, and frankly, sir, it would be a violation of my notary commission." The room was very quiet. Somewhere near the back, a server set down a tray of water glasses too hard and 3 of them clinked. My father looked at me. I looked at him. I did not say a word. He said into the microphone, very slowly, "What affidavit, Imogen?" I looked at Margie. Margie looked at me. She gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen given by a human being. I said, "Daddy, I think we should sit down." He said louder, "What affidavit?" And here is the thing. I had not planned this. I had not planned any of this. I had walked into that ballroom thinking I would survive the evening and drive home and put the affidavit back in the drawer in my apartment and never speak of it again. I had brought it with me only because Walter had said, "Take it with you. You don't have to use it. Just have it." But standing at that podium with my father's hand on my shoulder and 140 people watching, and Margie standing 5 feet away with her hands folded and her face absolutely calm, I did the only thing I could think to do. I opened my purse. I took out the manila envelope. I handed it to Margie. I said, "Please read the first page. Please read it out loud." Margie opened the envelope. She unfolded the affidavit. She put on her reading glasses, the kind on a beaded chain that hangs around the neck. She read the first page out loud in the same calm voice into the microphone she had been handed by a banquet server who had the good sense to stay out of it from then on. She read the heading, She read the sworn statement that I, Imogen Della Strickland, had been the recipient of repeated and documented attempts by my father, Royce Strickland, to extract funds from a trust established in my name by my late mother, Della Whitlow Strickland, in 2008. She read the dates. She read the amounts. She read the line about the $80,000 request on March 17th of this year, related to a strip mall investment in Eden, North Carolina, with a partner named Carl Pemberton. Carl Pemberton stood up so fast he knocked his chair backward. The chair hit the floor with a clatter. He walked out of the ballroom. He did not come back. His wife stayed. She looked at her plate. Bethany made a sound at her table that was somewhere between a gasp and a question. Her oldest son, the 28-year-old who lived in her basement, said, "Mom?" in a voice I had never heard him use. My Aunt Lorraine stood up. She did not say anything. She just stood up. The pearls at her throat caught the light from the chandelier above her. My father took his arm off my shoulder. He stepped back from the podium. He looked at Margie. He looked at me. He said, very quietly, "You let me do this in front of everyone." I said, "Daddy, you did this in front of everyone." He said, "Imogen." I said, "Daddy, I am going to sit down now, and I would like you to let me leave." He did not stop me. He could not have stopped me. He looked, for the first time in my entire life, like a man who had run out of an audience. I walked back to table 4. I sat down next to Aunt Lorraine. She put her hand over mine. Her hand was cold and dry and steady. The string quartet did not start playing again. Have you ever set a boundary so quietly, for so many years, that the person on the other side of it forgot you were even capable of holding one? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. The cascading consequences started before I even left the parking lot. Doug from Table 7, the regional sales rep, was on the phone with someone from the company by 9:15. I know this because Renee saw him do it on the way to the restroom. By Monday morning, the consulting contract my father had been promised as part of his retirement package was rescinded. The company's general counsel cited a clause about reputational risk. The clawback on his retirement bonus was triggered the following Friday. He lost roughly $310,000 in deferred compensation. The regional sales team's group text, which I learned about from Renee, who heard it from Doug's wife, who is in her book club, went silent for 3 days and then quietly reformed without him. Carl Pemberton's strip mall deal in Eden collapsed within 10 days. It turned out that Carl had been pre-selling silent partnership stakes to 4 different people, none of whom knew about each other, including a retired pastor in Burlington who had put in his entire pension. The affidavit, which named the deal and the date and the amount, became part of a fraud complaint filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State. My father was named as a co-investor in the original paperwork. He was not charged, but his name was on the filing. The Greensboro News and Record ran a small business section item about it 3 weeks later. It mentioned him by name. Bethany's church friends saw it. Bethany filed for separation 19 days after the party. She moved out of the house on a Wednesday with Mr. Bingley and her oldest son, and 3 boxes of her own things, plus the Pinterest board wedding album. She left him the house, which was in his name, and the second mortgage, which was also in his name. She moved in with her sister in Burlington. I heard from a cousin who heard from another cousin that the first thing she said when she walked into her sister's kitchen was, "I should have listened to that girl." The Sunday after the party, the pastor at First Presbyterian, a man named Pastor Whitlock who had been in the pulpit for 31 years and who had buried my mother, called my father into his office for a private conversation. I do not know what was said. I know that my father has not been to a service since. I know that Pastor Whitlock called me on a Tuesday afternoon 2 weeks later and asked if he could come by my apartment, and that he sat at my kitchen table for an hour, and that the only thing he said about my father at the end of that hour was, "Imogen, I have known your father for 28 years. I have suspected, for at least 20 of them, that your mother was carrying a weight she would not let any of us help her carry. I am sorry I did not press her. I am sorry I did not see you." Aunt Lorraine started calling me on Sunday afternoons. She called me every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon for the next 6 weeks. She told me stories about my mother that I had never heard. She told me about the time my mother had driven to her house in 1996 with a black eye my father had given her at a Christmas party, and how my mother had refused to say a word about it, and how my aunt had blamed herself ever since for not pushing harder. She told me about the time my mother had asked her, in the parking lot of a Bojangles in 2002, whether she thought it was possible for a woman to leave a man without ruining her child's life. My aunt had said at the time that she didn't know. She told me on the phone in October of last year that she had been wishing for 22 years she had said yes. My phone started ringing on Sunday evening after the party. It rang 47 times in the first 36 hours. I answered 3 of them. The first call was from Bethany. She said, "Imogen, I didn't know about the voicemails. I want you to know that." I didn't know. I said, "Bethany, I believe you. I'm sorry." The second call was from my Aunt Lorraine. She said, "Imogen, I should have called you a long time ago. Your mama tried to tell me things. I didn't listen. I'm calling now." I said, "Aunt Lorraine, thank you." The third call was from my dad. He called from a number I did not recognize. He left a voicemail. I have not listened to it. It is sitting in my voicemail folder along with the other 41. I do not know if I will ever listen to it. I do not need to. What I felt driving home from the Grandover that Saturday night was not satisfaction. It was not triumph. It was not even relief exactly. It was a tiredness so complete it felt like sleep. I drove home with the windows down and the cold October air coming through the car. I-40 was empty at that hour. The dashboard lights of the CRV threw a soft green across my hands on the wheel. I thought about my mother standing at the kitchen sink in 2007 washing the same plate 3 times. I thought about her sitting in Walter Kettle's office in 2008, 3 months after her diagnosis, signing the trust documents that would protect me for the next 16 years of her absence. I thought about Margie Boudreau sitting at her desk on Wendover Avenue with a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Notary," and a photograph of her dead husband next to her computer. I thought about how the people who love you don't always get to be the ones standing in the room with you when it matters. Sometimes they did the thing that mattered 10 years ago, in a quiet office above a bridal shop, with a fountain pen and a stack of paper, and they trusted that the right person would come along to pick it up. Sometimes they brought a casserole to a kitchen table in 2003 and sat with a grieving widow for 2 hours and didn't try to fix anything. And 21 years later, that small kindness came back around to save the daughter of the woman who had brought it. Real love does not need an audience. Real love builds the room, sets the chair, lays the paper on the desk, and then steps back and lets you walk in when you need to. Peace doesn't come from winning. Peace comes from standing on something solid that someone built for you, on purpose, because they knew you better than you knew yourself. The day after the party, I drove to the cemetery where my mother is buried. It was a Sunday morning. The grass was wet and the air smelled like wet leaves and old stone. I sat on the grass in front of her headstone. I did not cry. I did not talk to her. I just sat there for about an hour. On the way home, I stopped at the Walgreens on West Friendly and bought a new spiral notebook. Black cover, nothing special. I do not know yet what I am going to write in it. I just know I want to keep going. If you could protect one thing in your life, a place, a person, a promise, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. I tell one of these every night. Some nights I sit at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee and the African violets on the windowsill in front of me, all 5 of them, and I wonder if anyone out there is really listening. Then I read the comments. And I know, if this one stayed with you, the story on your screen right now is for you. It's about a woman named Hannah whose stepfather walked into the county recorder's office to sell the house her late father built with his own hands, not knowing her dad had filed a transfer on death deed in pencil 4 months before he died with a clerk who never forgot him. Tap the card. I'll see you there.